Okay, cool. So really like maybe a quarter. So everybody else is like going to the Q&A. I'm curious what the questions are going to be then.
Yeah, I think we unmuted here.
Yeah, we unmuted here.
Yeah,
it's working now. We got it. Sorry, we're just not smart enough to find the button.
Right away.
Right away. We did find it in the end too. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions you guys have on any of the stuff you've seen so far that has to do with AI? Yeah.
So how do we do this?
Either we repeat it or walk it over.
Okay. Well, I'll just do it here. Yeah. Hey, thanks. So I've spent a lot of time working on building kind of my own company's Copilot. And, we started with LangChain. That was the first thing we saw, and we worked with that for a while. Then we've seen semantic kernel come out, right? And there's some trade-offs between those two. They're both great, right? And then now prompt flow, one of the most exciting things I think I've seen today. So my question is, how do these three things all kind of interact? And what is kind of the best way to move forward with this? Because I'll be completely honest, like we're kind of starting to build our own prompt flow, right? It feels like a lot of the advancements in this space, everybody's kind of building the same thing, and we're trying to consolidate, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, like how?
No, I know. I think I know your question. Like, what are we doing? So actually, what we're trying to do is a couple of things, and we're not trying to be necessarily an orchestrator. Actually, we want the SDKs and the frameworks to sort of compete in that space. And actually, it's not super clear to me that you can be differentiated there. What we're trying to do is make it easy to evaluate your prompts. So you saw some of that in our session earlier. But really, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to facilitate evaluation, which is why we went UI first, because a lot of what you do, when you evaluate things, you kind of compare them side by side. You might edit one if you're doing like reinforcement learning or something like this. But what we want to support is you start in LangChain or semantic kernel or auto GPT or something, and then you push a button and it pulls it into prompt flow so that you can start experimenting. The UI is in our product, we have really four interfaces. We have a REST interface, we have an SDK in Python, we have a CLI, and we have the UI. And so we started UI first, but we'll have an SDK where you just stay in LangChain, and now it's time you want to do an evaluation, you incorporate our SDK, and you can start, interacting with our cloud environment.
Yeah, and what I showed at the talk was something that I built in LangChain, and then I kind of, took it in three different components and kind of reassembled it in prompt flow. Like, given that we don't have APIs today for prompt flow, it's all UX, that's all I could do. But there will be APIs to just do this whole thing. And so the inner loop, in my opinion, should be happening on your laptop. So all the logic that you're kind of plumbing together is like what data flows where at the end of the day is going to be something that you do on your laptop in code, and then you shoot it up. And I don't know if who's an Azure ML user here? Like, who's used Azure Machine Learning?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have used Azure Machine Learning a little bit, we have a CLI, and you just basically iterate on your laptop is where your data science actually happens, and then you send jobs to the cloud, and then you compare those jobs. They generate metrics, you compare those metrics, and so that's kind of a workflow that's very natural to us, and that's sort of the kind of the pattern and the paradigm that I think will, that we'll kind of chase a bit more. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff around. Yeah. Every week there's a new tool coming out.
Yeah. I mean, like the automated grounding, like you don't have to necessarily know how to get to a good grounding prompt. We give you a pretty good grounding prompt. You can iterate on that if you want. And we have a bunch of other ones too. You saw like the metrics, we maybe have 10 or so different metrics that you can run your prompts through without sort of figuring those out on your own. Also, like, I don't know if you use weights and biases or something like that, but Azure ML also has like a run history tracking, experimentation, evaluation, comparison, and lineage and all that kind of stuff that is really sits outside of like the actual framework part, which is the same thing we do with PyTorch and TensorFlow and stuff like that. We don't try to necessarily compete with those. You just write your script that way. I was wondering, Meng is the PM lead on this, and he's on the line. If Meng, you have your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so we are just trying to building this platform to be collaborated with any framework. So our core thing is to help people using whatever the framework to develop the application, but making their life easier on the evaluation of the result. So think about if you want to do a lot of evaluation and improve your AI quality using large language model, I think the prompt flow is the tool we hope that you can use. So yeah, that's just adding to what Greg and Daniel has said.
Okay.
Cool.
Do you have another question?
We had one in the chat here that kind of goes along with this. So Alex asked, where does the prompt flow evaluation compute run? Is that a compute instance or a cluster? And is it the same for deployments?
That's a great question. So what you do is you define an environment. We deploy that on a compute instance. And then in real time, whenever you hit run or bulk run, we send those jobs to the compute instance. And then we log it to.
Somebody turn your microphone.
To run history.
Yes, Seth.
Yeah, Seth's here. Come on up, Seth. So, and then when you deploy the model, we turn it into a container, and then we host it on an endpoint in MAR.
Yeah, so if you want to see here, I can
question.
Create a new environment on a compute instance, and I can give it a name.
These are good questions.
This person's dialed in. This person's played with AML before.
And I could either use the customized environment, for example, if I have like the very latest version of LangChain, which happens every, I think twice a week
20 minutes.
or 3. Like 5 minutes.
Here.
Every 5 minutes a new version comes out, and it has a feature that you probably want to use because it was in the blog post from yesterday. So so that's when you do the custom environment, and then Azure Machine Learning has an abstraction of an environment, so that's just something so you can kind of relate to if you've used it before, or if you don't use a custom environment, you just use the default environment, and then you have to kind of pick your.
If you saw the keynote demo, sorry, this is uncomfortable for you, Daniel. The environment I used had semantic kernel on it, FYI, if you're wondering.
Somehow it's not letting me do this. Do I not have access to any compute instances here? Anyway, so anyhow, that's sort of the way that you create the compute, and then when you run it, when you saw what you saw in the. I don't know what I'm showing here. This is your workspace. It feels like kind of an intrusion in your privacy here.
Yeah, don't break my speller for my phone.
Yeah. So, but this is where you can pick the environment. So I should go to my workspace.
Yeah.
So here you can.
You're a Mac user. You're stumbling.
Yeah, that too. But here you can see all the environments that the runtimes that I can pick from, right? So you can have multiple.
And we thought about being able to put it on a cluster, but it's just such a lightweight thing. Throwing it on the compute instance makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But so
and you could pick a little tiny one,
little
tiny
enable
compute.
in the future. So
we have one more question from the chat before I want to throw back to the room. So if we talk about compute on that side, let's go back a little bit in that sort of supply chain of data to AI, right? How complex of a data source can we go on this? Is it possible to run multiple database prompts to use as a source for an LLM prompt? What this person got, Hendrik, thank you. What he got was that they really only are limited by the tokens per prompt.
That's true.
That is correct.
And you can even iterate on them. You can chain together as many API calls as you want. Everything is completely in your control. That you're always at the limit of what the API can do. So GPT-4, for example, can do 32K, but you can send it like 28K of stuff and say summarize this in 4K, and it'll do that too. And then you can iterate on that. So I think right now it's pretty open. And even 2 months ago, it was limited to 8K. So it's already gone 4x. I think it'll just kind of go up. Yeah, you do lose some attention, I would say, because you're spreading it out over more tokens. But we found it to be pretty effective.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to think of these things as like I make a prompt and I call an LLM. It could literally be you make a prompt to call LLM, you make another prompt to call the LLM again, and then you join these together, and then it becomes a superpower, and then you do another. But again, like he says, like if you LLM, you kind of start to lose fidelity, it feels like.
It could get expensive too. I mean, it's up to you. But yeah, there's no preconceived notion of what your flow should be. It's whatever you guys want. Yeah, and then when you see things where there might be a wizard UI or something like bring your own data, where you can click a bunch of buttons and it'll make something for you really fast. Under the covers, that'll be building a prompt flow. And then when you want to say, oh, I really wanted 2 data sources and that only allowed me to have 1, then you can just break into PromptFlow and add another one. And they don't have to be obviously the same data. And then the other thing on that is like, you can configure your data sources to have authentication and stuff, and then we'll store that authentication for you in Key Vault, and then you can just call on that authentication per endpoint.
Yeah, these are really good questions.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
We're back to you guys in the room for our next one.
Questions? Everyone's just enthralled by this. Yeah. What's your? Oh, hold on. Yeah. There you go.
So I saw the button to deploy to Azure, and that's great. But are there any future plans to make this kind of interop across different clouds? I think of it more like from the orchestration standpoint, right? If I was integrating like this as the entry to a full chat application, like a full Copilot.
Yeah, I mean, we're not particular on it. In fact, it doesn't really spin any compute anyway because it's this little tiny Python container. Right now, we deploy to MR endpoint because we just built the product. But I mean, in the end, we build a container that you can just take with you and put on AWS or something like that. It's a good question for Meng on the roadmap to what compute targets you want to support, perhaps even outside of AML.
Yeah, so from us, the underlying code is actually supportable to any target. So it's not hard. Based on the demand, we will decide whether we can deploy to the other places. Right now, it's only Azure, but it's pretty easy to move to the others.
Yeah. It's really tiny. It's not a big thing. It's like, if you think about it, it's like text programming.
Yeah. I mean, we're inherently open anyway, so if you go to an endpoint and then you click on the model on that endpoint and then you go to the actual model, you'll see a folder with all the files in it, and you can just take it with you and download it and go do whatever you want with it. I don't totally recommend that. Meng's probably cringing because that format, we actually want to play with that format before we expose it as like a proper thing, but it would work. Great
question. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I used to teach high school, so awkward silence only awkward for you. It's true. Yes. Yeah. So this. Oh, okay. That was a great question. Yeah, PromptFlow does not support switching frequencies between different microphones.
Yeah. So. One question I had, you guys in the presentation earlier said that these LLMs, you stressed on the point that they can be used really for anything, that they're not just chatbots. I wanted to ask for maybe some of your personal favorite examples of other uses that have kind of stretched the boundaries of imagination with that.
So that's a great question because nobody really has, as far as I know. And I'll give you a little inside baseball. When we first imagined this actual scenario, we were actually going to make it a phone call, so that I was going to call in, and then this app would take it, and then as part of PromptFlow, the Whisper model would convert my audio into the text that then would convert it into, the prompt that then would chain it through all the way to the end till the answer came out. And then he would respond, and we would do a text-to-speech back to the phone, right? So that I thought was a really good idea, but we ran out of time, right?
Yeah, that was a little.
Well, I made my phone speller. It was like that worked, and then I also made like a math one because my kids are constantly asking me math questions. So, and that's not that different from Wolfram Alpha. I just like scrape a few more like Chag and stuff like that. But I mean, I guess I'm not allowed to say that.
What are you talking? You made an app for them? I've been looking forward to when my kid takes calculus. It's going to be the greatest day. We're going to go on a camping trip, fundamental theorem of calculus, and we're just going to eat s'mores. It's going to be wonderful.
It starts to get hairy after a while. I mean, like, eventually you're like, hey, I was pretty good at high school math, and I have a PhD and I chemical engineering, blah blah blah. But that was 30 years ago. So now like integration by parts, and like look at this one, like, and then the trick is actually I digress.
Before you digress even farther, I think they changed PEMDAS. I think PEMDAS is different now. But anyway,
what?
We're done nerding.
How dare you, Christian?
I know. I'm sorry.
This is fake news.
We had a good question in the chat that got rebumped, sort of around little bit of a responsible AI twinge to it. So Matthew has a question. At my company, the constant conversation surrounding AI and the uses of all the LLMs, even through Microsoft, the big question is about cybersecurity and the data that's fed into it. It stems from the idea that our data is our value as a company. And so if we create internal artificial intelligence models and prompts for internal use, where and what is the guarantee that our data isn't being fed into other LLMs for use and seeing that?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. One, from Microsoft's standpoint, we don't use your data. We do like a small logging part that is just for if we get like reports that it was causing, having harmful output and stuff like that. We don't necessarily look at it, but even if that's a problem, you can call us and if you're, then we will turn that off too. You can also host your own OSS model in your own environment, so that then you don't, it's not calling our service. But I think the real thing is that when you call an API, no matter what that API is, you need to know the contract of that API, because basically you're building this application that's going to call APIs. If you call, some service that may or may not call an LLM, then it's going to go through an LLM, right? So you need to know what the contract is on the other side of that API call. If you call SQL Server, it's going to call an LLM. But if you call...
I think the mics are having issues.
This one's dying on us.
We're so sorry.
Yeah, but so it just depends on what you call. And then Promptflow doesn't care. Promptflow, you call whatever API you want, and it's up to you to know, how that impacts, your application, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Helpful. Thanks, Greg. And yeah, just the mic away from the mouth a little bit, I think would be a little bit better.
It was broken, so I was going back and forth.
No, we just want to leave our guests here. We want to leave our guests here with a little bit of hearing left after this session, please. Just a little.
You got it.
I think, if I may, another thing that I would like to add, this question around data protection and exfiltration has come in multiple times. I think from Azure machine learning perspective, we support multiple features, especially around encryption at rest, as well as basically encryption in transit. So you have all those capabilities to protect your data from being seen by any of the system and services that you use at Azure. So you have that guarantee in addition to what Greg talked about.
Thanks, Thomas. That's a good clarification. I think there's another clarification question in the chat. Folks asking about how to compare LangChain with semantic kernel, when I should use which, sort of what the distinction is, why we have both. Anything that we can share on that?
So, our platform doesn't care. Like the Azure machine learning is agnostic. Microsoft internally, we want to push for one so that we can make it as powerful as possible. And you heard Kevin this morning, he said that's semantic kernel. But their customers can use whatever they want. As far as comparing and contrasting them, they change a lot. So, and that's not just those two, but actually I think the most popular one's Auto GPT now, because you just don't have to do that much for it and it'll just kind of run off. I'd leave it to you guys. To be honest, I don't think it's that big a deal. They just kind of spin around and call stuff. There's no secret sauce, in my opinion.
I think that's like asking the question: which one should you use on Azure Machine Learning? Should I use PyTorch or TensorFlow? To us, it's like the same question. We don't care. Just use it, and we are happy. Either one, whichever one makes you happiest, we want you to be happy with that. I think that's an answer. What do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of the usual analogy that we give now.
Yeah.
Some in the chat, but anything from the room?
I'm curious if anyone's tried to build applications that you mentioned you did. How did you evaluate whether they worked or not?
Well, it's a very tricky thing to do. Yeah, so it's very tough to do that, and that's why I was really interested to see the keynote this morning where this was unveiled, right? So I've been working on building kind of my own evaluation system just from scratch, basically, but it seems to really mimic what you guys are doing. The evaluations are tricky, and the other thing that I've found really tricky is the orchestration of it. So with LangChain alone, or with semantic kernel alone, you're kind of working just in the code, right? But when you get into these nested stacks of LLM calls, it gets really tough to reason about. And then it's tough to evaluate where it actually broke, at what part, right? So I'm excited for the orchestration side of this, so I can see exactly how each call is flowing through the system. And again, I started kind of trying to build my own version of this, but I'd rather not reinvent the wheel.
The part where it actually shows you how long it takes on each part.
The trace. It's huge.
So there's a trick to that trace.
Oh, we should probably get the mic.
Yeah.
You want to show the trick, Greg? Because I don't know which trick you.
I don't know if I have an example up, but the trick is like in every block of Python code where you put in your custom code, you have this @tool decorator, and that decorator is what it traces through. But any call that has that tool inside that decorator, it'll do a separate trace call through that too. So if you nest things in those boxes, and then of course across boxes, it'll do tracing. But even if you have like multiple routines inside or multiple calls inside, if you put it inside that main function, the calls to other functions, you'll get that nested trace.
I don't seem to find anything you can run on your workspace. And I'm just creating a computer instance for you on the other.
Do you run anything?
It's interesting. So which one are you in?
As I sort that out, any other questions? Any other questions as we sort this out? Questions? Like hopefully you're seeing that like this is a thing. You know how before it felt like, oh, ChatGPT, you know. But now this is an actual thing where you can test your prompts, you can create applications, you can deploy APIs, and you can validate whether these things are working correctly. And when they're deployed, you can monitor that these things are working correctly and take some measures when they aren't. And so hopefully you're seeing that. That's the thing I want people to take away from this is something that I can do now. And if you think of the LLM as just a big giant language calculator, then it makes more sense. And all the other hype kind of just starts to melt away, and you're left with the actual tech. And hopefully that I feel is the most helpful thing, in my opinion, because there's been a lot of, oh, it's telling people crazy things. Yeah, well, you gave it a crazy prompt. I mean, what do you expect? You know, once you start to internalize that, then this thing isn't as scary. Do you know what I'm saying?
Who saw the
Seth,
talk yeah, just real quick, like who saw the talk that Andrew gave, Karpathy, at, when was it, like an hour ago?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I could really recommend kind of going back and watching that one in the replay, because he gave a very nice, pretty detailed kind of overview. There's a lot of things he touched on, and they all matter.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
And he, for example, he was saying like, okay, you got to kind of, you know, for example, like how you prompt it, you say like, hey, I actually want a high quality answer from you. That matters. Like, so it seems kind of obvious. Like you say, it's a computer, it's always going to do its best. But the way that you craft the prompt, it's actually going to make a difference. Whether you tell them like, give me your best shot, because it's drawing off of content that kind of says, give me your best shot, and then it's always going to be something random that comes back afterwards. Whereas if you say, you're an expert at whatever, mining solutions, blah, 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 and here's what you know, now give me like your best assessment of the situation, it's just going to work harder on it, because the content that is being considered, if you will, or that went into the training is going to have more intelligence or more deeper thinking that went into it. So it's kind of, it sounds really weird and goofy in a way, but that's kind of thinking that you kind of have to start to understand on how to kind of coach these things.
The way to think about it is like there were a bunch of web pages where they said, you know, I am an expert at blah, blah, blah. And they use similar language. And when you have like tens of billions of web pages, this stuff comes up a lot. And then you condition that on all kinds of different outputs, and then you have the output on all kinds of different inputs, then you start to get these weights matter. And actually, the other thing he said that was super insightful was, if you want an exact answer, you want it to be right, don't try to make it do it in one token, because there's just not enough attention on any single token in the model to get one token right. But if you let it space itself out, like say, you know, walk through your steps, or, you know, give me a step-by-step, blah, 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 the benefit of that is it can space out what it needs to know in different weights, which is the different output of these individual tokens. And a token is like a third of a word or something like that when you think of the size of a token. Yep. It's like 2 letters or something.
Question.
Excuse me.
Is there any concept of being able to detect drift and when some of your prompts are starting to age out and causing a response to degrade?
Yeah, and in fact, we have monitoring on the endpoints now. It goes preview now, and basically what it can do is it can say, okay, when you deployed it, based on the data that you had at the beginning, I can, for example, check groundedness. I can ask the model a question. It's going to go to my database. It's going to get information. Then it's going to get a response and see if it's grounded based on the information that I gave it. But groundedness is going to be a function of the query, right? So as the queries start to change over time, then your groundedness could change as well. And so it'll monitor that, and it'll monitor all the other things as well. But it's basically a function. All these drift things are not a function of the model itself per se. They're a function of the data that comes into them over time. Yeah. And that goes preview now.
So Christian, did you have another question from online?
Yeah, Meng sort of answered it in the chat, but I think it's a good question. I was going to throw to either Meng or Seth on this. Seth being the MLOps expert of the unification of people, process, and product to deliver continuous value of machine learning. What does CI/CD look like, or what will it look like with prompt flow?
That's an interesting question. I'll leave to Greg.
Actually, well, there's a presentation tomorrow that they'll go over that, so I encourage you to go to that. But we have people thinking about that. Shanae and actually Abe, he's not here right now, but he's at the conference. That's what he does, is think about MLOps and how it projects onto large language model applications. You can kind of imagine what it looks like. You're going to need to do similar things, but you can still, because it goes to, let's say, for example, a managed endpoint, you can still do A/B testing, you can still have monitoring, you can have all these things you normally would have. And if you don't change the model, then it should, and you're getting the same input, you should expect roughly the same output. But I encourage you to go to that other talk, and you guys would see some of that. Yeah. I don't know if he's in the talk. I know Shanae is definitely in the talk.
Yeah, Shanae is doing the talk.
And he'll probably be there too.
But this is classic machine learning.
Yeah.
And we'll have a discussion session much like this after that one as well. So I wanted to make sure that we were able to plug that. Pretty shameless there. So another question from the chat from Fatahi says, is there a science behind deciding it's time to fine-tune my own model? Or is it more of a subject or a judgment call? Yeah.
Such an excellent question. Do you see us all be like, it's,
we all have opinions.
Yeah. So we can start with the official version, what Andre was saying today, because I found that very, very enlightening. He says but he was basically saying it's super expensive, it's super hard, fine tuning, it's super expensive, it's super hard, and exhaust all your prompting options before you go there.
I mean, you can experiment with a prompt in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
You could change the words and look at 10.
However, what I would say is we were using in this example that we gave, I don't know, most people went in the talk. So there was two-step or really a three-step flow that we had. And the first step was just detecting the customer's intent. So that was just a classifier, right? Pretty simple task, actually. And then I actually went and fine-tuned the ADA model, which is the cheapest of the models that we have, and tried to basically give it that. I didn't have enough time to actually go through all the metrics and everything, but I got pretty convincing results already. So if the task is simple, chances are fine-tuning is actually going to get you there with a lot less money, because your model is going to, ChatGPT is a big model, and it's always going to cost you, a bit more than ADA.
A supervised task, a non-generative task is way different than a generative task. And so you're doing classification, that's a supervised task, that's very much lends itself. Also, you're using ADA, which ADA loves to be fine-tuned, right? All your embedding, anytime you're using embeddings, you should always fine-tune those models. And then if you're Turbo or GPT-4 or something like this, and you want to fine-tune that, I think, a lot of people think they can embed information into the model. I don't think so. It's just their models are too big. What you can do is change the tone of the model, so you can get it to want to do X or Y. You can train it to only output URLs, or to prefer URL outputs or something like that. And then it'll just make up a bunch of URLs if it doesn't know a good URL. But you can tune it to do that kind of stuff. But I don't think you can tune it to know facts that are in your database or something.
Yeah.
and maybe folks online, or like if Thomas or Meng have an opinion.
Meng, anything to add there? No? Shaking his head.
No.
Pleading the fifth.
Okay. But great question.
Yeah. Comes up a lot.
Yeah. Is there more online, Christian?
Let me scroll back and see. But let's see. Anything in the room? Feel free to shout. Seth will run after you.
Okay, we got someone. Yeah, Seth has already left the building. He's on his next
Oh, he has?
talking engagement. He's a star.
I hear he's popular.
Hi. I'm just wondering if we could leverage prompt flow to prevent data contamination from feeding back data into the LLM that isn't what we want. And if so, how do we separate what's like a bad data contamination back into that with prompt flow or not?
Data. So, for example, so there's one. So let's take this retrieval augmented generation pattern where you go to a database, you get some information, you put it in the prompt, then you call the LLM and get a response back. Depending on the database, like the database could be the web, for example. Like I'm going to go to the web, or I'm going to go somewhere and get some information, and then I'm going to ask the LLM to reason about it. And it doesn't have to just be the web. It could be the web and a set of data that you have. And a lot of times, like say in a knowledge-based environment where you do want them to come and ask all kinds of questions, but they might ask questions that are easily answered on the web. Like Wikipedia knows that the iPhone 12 has this CPU or something like that. So you often will mix these two things. But if you're, say, Kohl's, for example, and actually, if you're some department store and you don't want answers coming from a different department store in your answers, then in prompt flow, we would just put like a Python module that's in between those two, that's custom code that you can just say, delete all things that look like this, that, or the other thing. I think we were making one not too long ago, and as an input, we accidentally put in a very, very small string, and it output some like CI/CD pipeline from somewhere. And it's like, oh, yeah, definitely don't want that coming out. And it was because we accidentally just had a really tiny string, so it didn't really know what to generate. And our output, we had the output generation to be really quite high. But those are that kind of tuning you would just sort of do in the flow. As far as like data getting into the retraining of the LLM, that just depends on what LLM you're using, how the training's happening, and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of a completely different game. And a lot of the OSS models are kind of starting to move to a model where they say this is exactly the data we trained on, like Red Pajama or something like this, where you know the data set that it was trained on. Yeah.
How are we doing with time? Christian, do you know?
Yeah, we got another 10 minutes, I think.
Okay.
We got one more question here on the chat from Guest, who apparently seems to be a little bit pessimistic here, saying, how long do you think this prompt engineering craze will last? I mean, don't you think prompt engineering and integration works are temporary needs that will probably only last for at max a few years to be replaced by more powerful AGI? Or do you have any reason to believe that these ways are the ways of the future?
Well, I mean, so one thing I would say is the reason why everybody's kind of talking about prompt engineering is because that's where the technology is at right now and is actually working. It's like if you've ever used, I mean, I don't know if it's a good example for prompt engineering, but my eye-opening moment was for LLMs in general was using GitHub Copilot and finding out that I'm suddenly like 80% more productive in writing code, right? So that was very surprising. I thought, okay, they're there. So that's where, like, for years and years of research we've had like about LLMs, and it was all like, okay, I can do entity recognition, or like things like, well, I don't really need entity recognition very much, or you can do classifier about sentiment analysis also kind of, and now suddenly we have this thing that actually everybody kind of thinks like, this is actually really useful and can build all these kind of copilots with it, and they're actually really useful. So that's kind of the moment right now, and kind of the prompt is the technology of the day. I will not kind of rule out that maybe in 2 years we'll have like a more mature thing. So there's actually something called soft prompt already, where you can actually kind of train some aspects of it. So Greg's shrugging. So no.
We dug into that one.
Yeah. So deeply. So I guess what I'm saying is like this is all pretty early days for all this whole technology. So a bunch of new stuff could happen, and so it's really hard. Like 6 months ago, ChatGPT wasn't even out, right? Oh, it just came out. It was November, right? So that's kind of the speed that we're talking at. The technology is now, you can use it. There's actually a product that you can actually, use, I guess, next week, if you're an insider, and then use it and do your LLM building with. So that's pretty fast, and it's based on prompts. So I would expect that to kind of stick around for a little while. But yeah, sure, new stuff will come along, and we'll just kind of keep kind of expanding our product suite for it. Yes, 4 comments.
So your thing was GitHub. Mine was actually entity extraction, because even though you hate it, I spent a lot of time on entity extraction building CRFs, which are total pain to train, and you got to have all the the label data and stuff. And it took us a long time to extract the address from a web page and stuff like this. It's actually not easy. And then you just throw it at an LLM and say, here are 5 examples of entities, and then go find all the entities in all these documents, and it just pulls the entities out really, really well. It's very impressive on a bunch of tasks like that. Classification, for example, just no problem. We had the first step is I'm going to use this LLM to label data for my traditional machine learning task, and it's well, you could just have it do the traditional. You can skip all the labels because it's already done. So that's 1. 2, in general, these LLMs formulate answers that are the aggregate or amalgamation of a lot of different web pages, where normally you do a search and it's in one web page or another, right? And even when they have an answer, it's cut from a web page. Whereas I was trying to find, the kids wanted to know who was the narrator of it was Peter Rabbit movie or something, and IMDb didn't have it, nobody had it, and it's because it was also one of the main characters. But then I asked ChatGPT and it knew. I think it was it was the person from Princess Bride, I think. And then 3 was something else really deep, and the last 2 were also it's 3 years. In 3 years, if it goes away, 3 years is a heck of a long time. I'm getting older by the day. 3 years is almost 1,000 days or something, probably more. I don't know, 10, 15.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, I think it's worth optimizing for 3 years. Yeah.
We got one more question in the chat here, and then I want to go back to the room for maybe our final question. So last one from the chat here comes from James. You mentioned the difficulty in tuning a base model to learn facts. Is this a function of the quantity of new tokens being trained in relative to those that are? For example, is there some quantity of new training data at which time the new facts, those concepts, start to become possible?
Yeah, great question. In my opinion, it has to see that answer formulated in a lot of different ways across a lot of different sources, and then it's the amalgamation of that answer that actually sort of drives the weights to be to not be brittle, so that it outputs the answer. You could we have done things where we train it, fine tune it with just a small set of data in a relatively structured way. And just stick it in there over and over and over again, and we didn't get it to work very well. And I don't know if Vijay Aski's on the call, but he did a bunch of work there where we tried to get it to work, and we couldn't, through several different attempts in different strategies, didn't get it to work. So I think you need to, the relative is true, and I think you need it sort of reformulated in subtle ways that it sees in other parts of its text natural patterns for it to actually take hold. And when you compare that to just hitting a database and spreading your wings wide and saying, okay, give me the 40 nearest neighbors, and taking that and putting it in the prompt, it's just so much more effective putting stuff in the prompt. And the prompt is very, very, very direct. And when you mentioned soft tuning, soft tuning is basically, essentially you take the first K tokens, and this token, instead of picking a token I'm going to use a word, and a word's a string, and that string is already, it has an embedding, right? All the tokens have embeddings. Maybe it's K100 floats, and that's the representation for that token. And then when you send it in a string, it goes and grabs those representations. Well, in soft tuning, what you do is you say, I'm going to train an additional 20 tokens for a specific task, and these 20 tokens are brand new tokens that haven't been trained before. So then you get this K100 weights for each token at the beginning of your prompt. So you really get to sort of tune that thing well to that task. But compared to, it's not much better than just hard tuning a prompt by actually just putting in the text. And when you compare it to LoRa, for example, for fine tuning, for a hard data set, LoRa is just significantly better. And it does have more weights to tune, so that does play a part. Yeah. but it's throughout the whole network. Yeah, I was really hoping for soft tuning because actually soft tuning would be really much easier to serve. Soft prompt tuning, but it just doesn't work very well. No offense to the Google people who wrote it.
All right, well, we have another 4 minutes. I want to just take a quick moment to say thank you to everybody for joining in. We do have a survey for feedback that's been put in the chat if you get a second. I'll throw back over to Greg, Daniel. Last question, perhaps, from the room before we wrap up.
Anyone? Well, looks like we're good here. We know everything.
Well, Greg's answered all your questions.
We all know the same, whatever it is. Exactly. Could be small.
There's another question.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't want to ask another, but if nobody else is, so we've seen a lot today of like this idea of plugins, and you guys in your demo showed the like inference is the first step in that chat flow, right? It seems like that's really tough to scale. Like the plugins right now, it seems like, you know, we can enable 3 at the moment. I'm curious of your thoughts on how we can expand that to larger amounts of tools or plugins.
Yeah. So fundamentally, if you had, say, 10,000, or like for every domain on the web, you had a plugin, and you send a question to the LLM and say, just enable all of them and give me the best answer. Like, I need to know, you know, I want to buy a pair of shoes or something. Its ability to sort of figure out which ones to call, and then, yeah, that's a really, I don't think anyone has an answer to that. It's a really hard question, and I think that does make you think what scenarios are these plugins going to be the most useful in. And you know, maybe you're going to need like a search ranker or something like this, and maybe that thing has to be trained on domains that are actually from web pages that you have previous information on. I don't know, but it's not a trivial problem for sure.
But I think it does look a little bit like you say, like the inference in the first step, finding out which experts am I going to pull in, or which plugins are I ever even going to pull. And if that thing goes wrong, then you're out of luck, right? The user says, I want to buy galoshes, and that thing doesn't know, whatever, doesn't seem to kind of find that there's a special shoe plugin or something, then you're out of luck.
Those scenarios are different. Like if you're building an enterprise application where you're trying to call like the 7 data sources that you have information in, you know, back on the enterprise side, that's a completely different, you know, you just call 7 of them, or, you know, you can call the top 4 or something like that. The sort of turning ChatGPT into a search engine sort of thing, that's a different thing, that or some application that has to span a wide array of plugins. I think that is a hard problem.
Okay, should we close it here?
We're at time. Yeah. Thank you all for joining. Thanks, Greg, Daniel, for hosting in person. Meng Thomas for joining us here on the line. Everybody in chat, everybody in the actual physical meeting room. Imagine that in 2023. Thanks for joining us. We will see everybody again tomorrow for another great day of build. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.